Lenora Quinn was 12 minutes late on purpose, and by the time she reached the rooftop restaurant, she had already decided 3 things. She would not apologize. She would order something too strong for a woman on a blind date, and if the man waiting for her looked too polite, too clean, and too pleased with himself, she would make sure he never asked to see her again. That had been the plan from the moment her cousin called and said his name like it was a solution instead of a person. Sylvan Marchetti. Important. Wealthy. Serious. The kind of man who could open doors for the right woman. Lenora had heard the hidden part of that sentence too clearly. The right woman. Meaning one who smiled on command, kept her voice soft, and did not bring old grief or family bills or a half-broken building into the room with her. So she had dressed for war instead. The black dress was a mistake she had bought that afternoon because she was angry enough to spend money she did not have. It was simple from the front and dangerous from the side, cut close through the waist and lower across the back than anything she had worn in years. She had paired it with dark lipstick, gold hoops she rarely touched, heels that made her look calm while her feet begged for mercy, and a leather jacket that told a better lie than she did. She had even bought cigarettes from the gas station near the bridge and watched 2 videos in the cab so she could hold one without looking like the sort of woman who still labeled spice jars. None of it felt like her. That was exactly the point. The hostess saw her at once, and the quick, polite smile she arranged did not hide the fact that she had already guessed trouble. Lenora did not lower her voice, did not smooth her hair, did not offer the shy apology that would have made everything easier for everyone. "I'm here for Sylvan Marchetti," she said, putting the cigarette pack on the front desk for no reason, except that she liked the hostess's eyes dropping to it. "If he left, I'll survive." "He hasn't left, Ms. Quinn," the hostess said, though her gaze lingered on the jacket, the lipstick, the heel of one shoe tapping a little too sharply against the marble. "This way." The rooftop was one of those places built to make people feel expensive the moment they sat down. Soft music floated over the room like it had been trained not to disturb the rich. The windows showed Manhattan glittering clean and far away, too far to smell the streets below. Candlelight sat on white tablecloths and turned every glass into a piece of jewelry. Lenora knew the type. Wedding clients loved places like that, because flowers looked better in rooms where money had already done half the work. She followed the hostess through tables full of people who knew how to speak without moving their hands too much. And before she even saw him, she felt it. That strange shift some people carried with them, the one that changed the room without noise. Conversations did not stop for Sylvan Marchetti. They only seemed to bend around where he sat. He was near the far windows, alone, not checking his phone, not drinking to pass the time, not looking irritated by her lateness. That was the first thing that annoyed her. The second was that her cousin had not exaggerated. Sylvan was not handsome in the easy way some men were, the kind that came from dimples and harmless confidence. He looked harder than that. Dark suit, open collar, black hair cut short, shoulders built like he expected the world to push back and had prepared accordingly. There was no restless movement in him. He sat very still, one hand near a glass of water, the other resting loosely on the table. And when he looked up as she approached, his eyes held on her face first, not her dress. Men usually betrayed themselves faster than that. Lenora stopped beside the table and let him see the cigarette between her fingers before she said anything at all. "You must be Sylvan." "I am." He stood, not too fast, not lazily, just enough to pull her chair out and make the gesture look like a choice instead of a reflex. "Lenora." His voice was low and even, and the way he said her name made it sound like he had been expecting exactly this version of her all evening. That annoyed her too. She sat down without thanking him, dropped her purse on the table beside the candle, and put the cigarette pack next to the wine list as if she did that every day of her life. "I'm late, because I changed my mind twice and came anyway." "You can decide whether that's honesty or bad manners." Sylvan sat across from her and did not smile. "Why choose? It can be both." The answer landed a little too neatly. Lenora opened the cigarette pack, took one out, and held it between her lips while she searched her purse for the lighter she had made herself buy. "That usually works better on women?" "What does?" The calm voice, the steady eyes, the answers that sound like they belong in movies where men with expensive watches say meaningful things and ruin people quietly. That got the smallest shift at the corner of his mouth, not really a smile, more like the beginning of one that changed its mind halfway. "You came prepared." She lit the cigarette, drew in too much smoke at once, and nearly betrayed herself on the first breath. She turned her head just enough to hide the cough, and then waved for the waiter before the burn left her throat. "I want whiskey," she said, not bothering to look at the drink menu. Something strong enough to erase the evening if it goes badly. The waiter glanced once at Sylvan, which Lenora noticed immediately. Sylvan did not nod or speak, but the man seemed to get his answer anyway and stepped off at once. "There," Lenora said, tapping Ash with more confidence than skill. "That is the part I hate." "What part?" "The part where men pretend they don't enjoy being obeyed." She leaned back in the chair and crossed one leg slowly, as if she did not notice the slit of the dress pulling higher on her thigh. "They never order for you right away. First, they pretend to respect your choices. Then the night goes on, and suddenly the driver brings the car, the restaurant picks the dessert, and you somehow find yourself being managed. You say that like it has happened before." "It has. Different faces, same disease." Sylvan studied her for a moment, and she could not tell whether the silence that followed came from judgment or patience. That uncertainty bothered her more than open dislike would have. Open dislike she could handle. Open dislike made men simple. "You wanted to scare me before I finished the first glass," he said finally. Lenora let out a short laugh. "That sounds arrogant." "It sounds observant." The waiter returned with the whiskey. Real whiskey, not something polite and watered down. Lenora took the glass and drank too much too fast, because she would rather burn than be read so easily. Heat rolled down her throat and spread through her chest, and she set the glass down with the kind of control she had to borrow from old versions of herself. "You think you know a lot from one sentence." "Not from one sentence," Sylvan said. "From the cigarette you don't know how to hold, the jacket you keep adjusting because it isn't yours, and the fact that you walked in angry before I gave you a reason." For one humiliating second, Lenora looked at her own hand, then wished she had not. She put the cigarette in the ashtray and reached for the whiskey again. "You have this whole room trained to breathe around you. Has anyone told you that gets tiring quickly?" "Yes." "And did you care?" "No." That should have made her laugh, and to her irritation it almost did. She covered the moment by lifting the glass again and saying, "Good, I was worried you might be easy." "I'm not." "No," Lenora said, meeting his eyes over the rim of the glass. "I noticed that too." There was something deeply unfair about the way the dinner kept refusing to go where she wanted it. She had planned for offense, not composure. Planned for ego, not attention. Planned for a wealthy man who would see a woman trying too hard and decide she was beneath his patience. Instead, Sylvan watched her the way a man might watch a locked room after hearing movement on the other side, not forcing entry, not stepping away either. It made her want to get meaner. "My cousin says you're serious," Lenora said. "That's usually a bad sign." "What does serious mean in your family?" "It means a man who likes rules and talks about stability as if it's a favor to everyone else." She glanced around the room, let the cigarette go out untouched, and pushed the glass of whiskey a little farther toward the candle. "You own restaurants, right? Or buildings, or docks. Men like you always own something large enough to make the newspaper and quiet enough to keep other things hidden." "Men like me," she shrugged. "Power looks similar from the outside." "And from the inside? I wouldn't know." Lenora leaned forward. "I sell flowers. I make dead rooms look softer than they are. Weddings, funerals, anniversaries, baby showers, apologies if the husband has enough money. That's my side of the city. You're clearly from a different one." At that, Sylvan's gaze dropped to her hands, which she had curled around the whiskey glass. Lenora followed his eyes before she could stop herself. Fine cuts, tiny half-healed nicks, a faint line of green dye near the base of her thumb from handling stems all afternoon. She had scrubbed them before dressing. Not hard enough, apparently. "Florist," he said. She hated the tiny shock that went through her. "Did my cousin send you a file on me?" "No." His eyes lifted back to hers. "Your hands did." That line probably works even better than the calm voice. "I wasn't trying to make it work." He paused, then added, "You smell like lilies." Lenora stared at him. The flower shop smell had followed her for years. Cold water, cut stems, pollen, damp leaves, the faint sweetness of whatever she had spent the day building. Most people never noticed it, or if they did, they treated it like background. She was not prepared for him to say it that way. Not as an accident, not as an insult, but as if he had decided the detail mattered. She reached for the cigarette again, only to remember it had died in the ashtray. "You notice too much." That is usually the difference between peace and trouble. "And which one am I?" Sylvan glanced once at the dead cigarette, then at her whiskey. Tonight, undecided. The answer annoyed her enough to make her push harder. She picked up the wine list at random, did not open it, and said, "You know what I hate about blind dates? Everyone acts like the woman is being given a chance. No one says that part out loud. But it sits in the middle of the table the whole time. Here you go, Lenora. One more chance before life becomes too expensive, too lonely, too late. Smile nicely and try not to mention the dead husband too early." Sylvan's expression did not soften, and for some reason that made it easier to keep speaking. Then if the man has money, people get even stranger. Suddenly they aren't introducing you. They're placing you. Sylvan was quiet a moment. "You think that's what tonight is?" Lenora laughed once, not kindly. "Isn't it?" "No. Then what is it?" He answered too quickly for it to be a performance. "A dinner. That is either honest or very disappointing." He looked at her over the candle. "You expected something uglier." "I usually do. Does it help?" The question landed in the center of her chest with far too much accuracy. Lenora took a slower drink this time and looked beyond him at the city, because the city did not ask personal questions, and then wait calmly for the answer. "Sometimes," she said. "If I expect the worst, then at least I know where to put it when it arrives." "And tonight?" She turned back to him. "Tonight I'm still deciding." The waiter returned for food orders, and Lenora nearly told him she wasn't hungry just to keep the act alive. Instead, she ordered grilled sea bass because it was the first thing her eyes landed on, and because pretending not to eat in front of a man was a kind of performance she had always hated in other women and refused to practice in herself. Sylvan ordered after her, quick and simple, and when the waiter left, Lenora noticed something she had missed before. No one came too close to the table unless invited. The manager had passed twice already, but only stopped near other guests. 2 men at the bar looked toward Sylvan once, then away too fast. Even the staff moved around him with the careful ease people used when they were accustomed to the shape of authority. It was not theatrical. It was worse. It was ordinary. "Your cousin told you my name," Sylvan said. "What else?" Lenora thought of the phone call from 3 nights earlier, the one she had answered while stripping roses in the back room after closing. Her cousin June had been in that cheerful, practical mood she used when trying to save people from themselves. "He's older than the boys Cora would set you up with," June had said. "He's stable, discreet, not needy. He has real money." That last part had made Lenora laugh so hard she nearly cut her finger. "She said you were serious," Lenora repeated. "And private. She said you don't waste time." "And what did that mean to you?" "It meant I should wear something expensive or something dangerous." She glanced down at the black dress. This was cheaper than it looks. "And the danger?" Lenora met his eyes. That part was free. To her surprise, he smiled then. Not fully, but enough to change his face in a way that made the room around him seem briefly less cold. It did not soften him. It only made him more human, which was not as safe as softness would have been. The fish arrived. Lenora ate. Sylvan ate. The conversation moved in strange, uneven currents, not smooth enough to feel easy, but not jagged enough to fail either. He asked about the shop, and listened to the answer without pretending flowers were more exotic than they were. She told him Quinn House Florals had been her parents' before it became hers, that funerals paid faster than weddings, because grief made people decisive, and that spring was never as profitable as everyone imagined, because peonies cost more and broke faster, and brides cried over colors, as if color were a personal betrayal. He asked what she liked best, and she nearly told him nothing, because that would have kept the edge sharp. But instead, she said, gardenias in old houses, white tulips when people don't overfill the vase, and lilies, even though customers lie and say they love them, until they remember the smell lasts after the guests leave. "Do you lie too? About flowers? About what you love?" Lenora set down her fork. There it was again, the deep, irritating talent he had for stepping 1 inch past, where the conversation should have stayed. "You ask personal questions for a man who claims tonight is only dinner." Sylvan folded his hands loosely on the table. "You answered? That doesn't make the question less personal." "No, it only makes you less guarded than you want to be." The truth of that angered her enough to make her laugh. "You are a very difficult man to dislike." I'm not sure that was meant kindly. It wasn't. He accepted that without injury, which only made the whole evening stranger. By the time the plates were cleared, Lenora realized with alarm that she had almost gone 20 minutes without performing. The realization itself shoved her back into the role. She reached for the whiskey bottle, poured too much, and said, "This was a mistake." "The drink?" "The evening." Sylvan's eyes stayed on her hand as she lifted the glass. If you believed that, you would have left before the fish. Maybe I wanted the fish. Maybe. He took a sip of water. Or maybe you wanted to find out whether I was what you expected. Lenora held the glass suspended for a second too long. And am I? No, he said it simply. I expected you to be easier. Something hot moved through her at that. A mix of offense and something more dangerous. You don't know me. I know enough to see effort when it's aimed at distance. Lenora swallowed the whiskey too fast. You keep talking like you watched me before tonight. Sylvan was still for a moment. I knew your name before tonight. She laughed once, but this time it held no humor. That sounds like a terrible habit. It can be. His gaze stayed steady. Especially when the woman arrives dressed for a version of herself that doesn't fit. Lenora put the glass down very carefully. You're starting to make me regret not being ruder. You can try again. Maybe I will. Maybe you should. His calm did not challenge her. It invited honesty, which was somehow worse. Lenora looked past him again, through the glass and into the black shine of the river. This was how mistakes were made, she thought. Not through drama, through attention, through one decent answer after another, until a woman already too tired for games started forgetting which lies she had put on at home. Her phone buzzed against the table. She glanced down and saw Cora's name. Relief came first, then annoyance at herself for feeling it so hard. Sorry, she said, and answered before the second buzz. What? Cora's voice came through bright and careless in the way only daughters could manage when they knew their mothers were out trying to be something else. So, she said, are you at least getting a free meal out of this? Lenora turned slightly away from the table. I'm eating fish and being judged. It's basically church with better lighting. Cora laughed. That means he's interesting. That means you should be studying. I am studying. Multitasking exists. Lenora glanced toward Sylvan and found him looking not at her face, but at the fondness she had failed to hide from her voice. It unsettled her enough to make her sound sharper when she said, Go bother Nana if you're bored. I'll be home later. Okay, don't sound happy about it. Tell your mysterious millionaire I said hello. Lenora ended the call before Cora could say anything worse. When she set the phone down, Sylvan said, Your daughter thinks I'm a millionaire. She also thinks coffee counts as breakfast. I don't use her as a source. How old is she? 19. Lenora picked up the dead cigarette pack and turned it over once between her fingers. Second year of college, smarter than is comfortable for me. Cautious? Lenora shook her head. Not even a little. She got that from her father. Sylvan's gaze rested on her face for a long second after that. And your husband? The room seemed to tilt just enough for her to notice. There it was. The word most men avoided on first dates unless they had been coached into gentleness beforehand. Lenora had almost wanted him to ask, just so she could see whether he would do it badly. Dead, she said. A year and change. I'm sorry. No, you aren't. His eyes did not leave hers. Not for the man, for what it did to the room when I asked. Lenora had no answer ready for that. She looked down at the cigarette pack and said, A heart attack, that's the simple version. People like simple versions. And the harder one? She should have refused. Instead, the whiskey and the fatigue and the relentless honesty of him had worn a thin line through her defenses. The harder one, she said quietly, is that some days I miss him and other days I feel relieved he can't make one more decision inside my life. Then I hate myself for both. Sylvan did not rush to comfort. That sounds normal. No, Lenora said a little too sharply. It sounds ugly. He leaned back slightly. Ugly and normal are not the same thing. The sentence sat between them. Lenora looked at him and, for the first time that night, stopped trying to win the conversation. You make that sound easy. It isn't. No, she said after a beat. I don't think much is. Sylvan reached for his glass, then stopped when a movement at the next table caught Lenora's eye first. A man in a navy suit, mid-50s, red with drink, had turned too far in his chair and was still looking. Not glancing. Looking. He had been doing it on and off since Lenora sat down, but now the whiskey in him had done what whiskey often did in men like that, and made him feel entitled to his own stupidity. He smiled when he saw Lenora notice. Then his eyes dropped openly to the neckline of her dress. Lenora's whole body went cold with a kind of old, familiar disgust. Before she could turn away, he lifted his glass in her direction like they shared a joke. Sylvan did not look at her. He looked at the man. He did not speak. He did not move much at all. He only turned his head and held the man's eyes for one calm second, maybe two. The man's smile disappeared. He lowered the glass at once, muttered something to the woman beside him, and faced his own table so quickly it might have been comic if Lenora had not seen real fear flash across his face. She looked back at Sylvan. "Did you just frighten a stranger for looking at me?" He was looking badly. "That is not a crime." "No." Sylvan picked up his water. "But it is a habit I dislike." Lenora stared at him. The answer should have sounded possessive. It did not. It sounded like fact, and she hated how much safer that made her feel. The check arrived without either of them asking for it. Lenora almost objected on principle, then stopped herself. She did not actually want to fight about money in the middle of a restaurant full of polished glass. Not tonight. Instead, she stood, slipped on the leather jacket and said, "I'm taking a cab." Sylvan stood too. "I'll have a car take you." "No, it's raining. I've survived weather before." He looked toward the window. The first drops had started to strike the glass, thin and silver under the lights. "I believe you," he said. "That doesn't make the cab cleaner." Lenora wanted to tell him where to put his concern. Instead, she found herself walking with him toward the elevator while the room tried not to stare. The air outside the restaurant was colder, and by the time they reached the building entrance, the rain had become serious. A black car was already pulling up, as if the city had been informed before she was. The driver stepped out, broad shoulders, dark coat, watchful eyes. He opened the rear door without a word. Lenora stopped under the awning and turned to Sylvan. "Do you always arrange outcomes before women agree to them?" "No." He stood beside her with rain misting his shoulders and did not attempt to move her by force or tone, only transportation. "That is still an outcome. Then you may refuse it." The answer irritated her, because again it left the choice in her hands when she had nearly prepared herself to resent him for taking it. Lenora looked at the rain, then at her heels, then at the driver, then at Sylvan. "You're very difficult." "So you've said." She got into the car. The city looked different through wet glass, softer around the edges, dirt turned into reflection. Storefronts became streaks of light and color. Lenora gave the address of the flower shop instead of the apartment upstairs, and then regretted it at once, but not enough to take it back. The driver, whose name she learned was Mateo when Sylvan used it once on a quiet phone call, said nothing more than necessary. Sylvan sat beside her rather than across from her, which made the silence feel narrower, and the warmth from his body far more noticeable than it should have. "Did your cousin lie to you about me?" he asked after a while. Lenora looked out the window. "She told me you were private, which I took as code for unpleasant." "And now?" "Now I think private is the least interesting thing about you." "That sounds like criticism." "It is criticism." He let the corner of his mouth shift. "And yet you stayed through dessert." "I stayed through fish. There was no dessert." "You noticed." The quiet in the car after that should have felt awkward. It did not. It felt dangerous in another way, because Lenora could hear herself almost relaxing into it, and women in her position did not relax around men like Sylvan Marchetti unless they wanted trouble touching the walls of their lives. She thought of Maureen upstairs with her late-night tea and aching knees, of Cora pretending not to worry about next semester's tuition, of the flower invoices in the office drawer, read and folded and waiting. She had come to dinner hoping to disgust him, and now she was being driven home by a man who had frightened a stranger with a glance, and made her talk about grief like it was not a shameful private habit. The car stopped outside Quinn House Florals a little after 10:30. The shop windows were dark, but the apartment kitchen above still glowed. Maureen never slept properly until Lenora came home on nights like that. She put her hand on the door handle, and then heard Sylvan say, "I knew your husband's name before tonight." The sentence was so clean, so oddly placed, that Lenora turned back at once. "What?" Sylvan did not look away. "Gavin Quinn." The cold moved through her too fast to be called fear, and too sharp to be anything else. "Why?" His face gave almost nothing, but the fact that he had chosen to say it now, at the end, in the car, and not over dinner, told her the answer would not be harmless, because I don't sit down with strangers. This was a blind date. "For you," he said. Lenora stared at him, the rain moving in silver lines beyond the glass. "You looked into me before dinner." "Yes." "And you're telling me this now because if I don't, you'll feel it later anyway." His voice stayed calm. "And because I want you angry for the right reason." She almost laughed from shock. "That is one hell of a sentence." "It's an honest one." Lenora opened the car door before her body could remember how to stay still. Rain hit her bare shoulders at once, cold and immediate. She turned back down toward the open door. Was the whole thing fake then? No. Then what part was real? Sylvan looked up at her from the dark interior of the car. One hand on the seat, the city's reflected light moving across the hard line of his face. The part where I expected one woman and met another. The answer stayed with her all the way up the stairs. Maureen was in the kitchen in her robe with one hand around a mug that had gone cold half an hour earlier. Cora leaned against the counter in socks, eating cereal from the box because she claimed bowls were for women with peace of mind. Both of them looked up at once when Lenora came in. Well? Cora asked. Did he chew with his mouth open? Please say yes. I need one weakness. Lenora closed the door and dropped her purse onto the table. His weakness appears to be saying exactly the wrong thing in a voice that almost makes it sound reasonable. Cora grinned. So that's a no on the chewing. Maureen's eyes narrowed slightly. You stayed longer than I expected. That is because your daughter is a liar and told me free dinner was always worth at least 90 minutes. Cora lifted the cereal box in triumph. I stand by the principle. Lenora took off the leather jacket and set it on the back of a chair. The apartment smelled like tea, laundry soap, and the roses she had brought upstairs because they were too bruised to sell but too alive to throw away. Her own rooms never smelled rich. They smelled real. I'm going to shower, she said. You liked him? Cora said. Lenora shot her a look. I did not say that. You didn't have to. Maureen watched her too carefully over the rim of her mug. Did he make you uncomfortable? The question was not simple. Lenora thought of Sylvan's stillness, the way he noticed everything, the way the room bent around him, the way he had said Gavin's name in the car. Yes, she said. But not in the usual way. Maureen set down the mug. That sounds worse. Lenora almost told them, almost said there had been something hidden under the dinner from the start, something she could not yet name, but had already begun to feel. Instead, she shook her head and went to the bathroom, where she stood under hot water until the dark lipstick ran down the drain and the smell of cigarette smoke left her hair. Even then, when she caught her own reflection in the mirror, she looked too much like the woman from dinner, and not enough like the one who tied ribbons around funeral arrangements in the morning. Sleep came late and badly. Twice she woke to the sound of rain, and once to the shape of Sylvan's last sentence moving back through her head. I knew your husband's name before tonight. By morning her neck hurt, her patience was gone, and the black dress hanging over the closet door looked like evidence. The shop opened at 8. Lenora cut stems, changed water, handled 2 last-minute anniversary orders, and 1 funeral spray, and tried not to keep looking at the front door each time the bell failed to ring. The bell had been broken for months, and Gavin had promised to fix it 4 separate times before dying without managing it. The memory irritated her enough to push it away. Cora left for class at 10 after making Lenora promise not to spiral about one interesting man in a nice suit. Maureen stayed upstairs because her knee was bad from the rain. The morning was moving toward normal when the black car from the night before stopped outside the shop. Lenora saw it through the front window and closed her eyes once. Of course. Mateo stepped out carrying a flat white box. He came inside with the same controlled watchfulness he had worn in the car, though daylight made him look slightly less like trouble and slightly more like the sort of man who never forgot a face. Ms. Quinn, he said. If those are flowers, I'm sending them back on principle. They are flowers, Mateo said, and I have been told not to argue if you do. That, against her will, almost made her smile. She cut the tape, opened the box, and found 6 gardenias resting in white tissue, perfect and expensive, and far too soft for the kind of morning she was having. There was a card. She opened it. For the woman who should never smoke again. Lenora stared at the handwriting. The man could have sent roses. Any idiot with money sent roses. Gardenias meant either luck or observation. She did not like either option. Take them back, she said, though without force. Mateo waited. Lenora set the card down. No, fine, leave them. But tell him this is not charming. I don't think he's aiming for charm. That answer surprised her enough to make her look up sharply. Mateo's face, however, had returned to its careful, neutral expression. He nodded once and left. Lenora put the gardenias in a low glass bowl by the register, where customers would assume they belonged to the shop. She told herself that was why she chose the front and not the back room. Around noon, an older man came in to order white lilies for his sister's memorial. A woman in too much perfume bought peonies and complained about the weather. For almost 3 hours, the day behaved. Then a stranger walked in. He was not the kind of man a florist remembered by clothes. The coat was ordinary, the face forgettable if not for the eyes, which moved once across the room and filed everything away. Not admiring the flowers. Measuring the exits. Lenora noticed because she had spent years noticing men who looked as if they might tell a bride she was wrong about blush roses, and then ask for a discount with the same smile. This man smiled too, but it did not reach the rest of him. "Ms. Quinn?" he asked. Lenora put down her scissors. "That depends who's asking. Someone trying to sort an old business mistake." He stopped at the counter and looked past her at the office door. "Your husband handled deliveries, didn't he?" The room went cold around one ordinary sentence. "My husband is dead," Lenora said. "Yes," the man replied, and there was something almost polite in the way he said it. "Which is why I'm here." Lenora's fingers curled around the counter edge. "You're in the wrong shop." He tipped his head slightly. "Am I? I was told Gavin Quinn liked to keep records close to home when he stopped trusting where he worked." Every instinct she had told her to play confused, dismissive, insulted, anything but interested. "I think someone wasted your trip." "Maybe." His eyes moved once to the gardenias by the register, then back to her face. "But if you happen to come across anything black and leather and older than your receipts, you should think carefully about who you call first." "Are you threatening me in front of my hydrangeas?" For the first time, the smile on his face became real enough to be ugly. "I'm advising you." He slid a business card across the counter. It had only a number, no company name. "Advice is cheaper than regret." Before Lenora could answer, the front door opened behind him, and two women came in chatting about centerpieces. The stranger stepped aside at once, the whole encounter tucked neatly back under his coat, and walked out without another word. Lenora stood still until one of the women said, "Excuse me, we're here about Saturday's wedding," and forced the rest of the day through steady hands she no longer trusted. She did not tell Maureen immediately. She did not tell Cora at all. She told herself it was because there was not enough information yet. Because women with families could not panic every time a man with bad eyes mentioned the dead. The truth was simpler and uglier. She was scared, and she wanted one more hour before fear became a shared object in the house. After closing, she went into the back office and opened the lower file drawer Gavin had used when he still pretended the shop books were not too small to need hiding places. She found invoices, old receipts, a broken tape measure, 3 unpaid parking tickets with his name on them, and a watch she had once thought he'd lost on the subway. Nothing else. She nearly laughed at herself. This was how shame worked. One stranger with the right tone, and suddenly a widow was crawling through filing cabinets in her own shop like there might be a bomb hidden under the tax forms. She pushed the drawer shut too hard. The cabinet rocked. Something thudded softly behind it. Lenora froze. For a long second she only listened, hearing her own breath and the hum of the flour cooler. Then she crouched, reached behind the cabinet, and found an envelope taped flat against the back. Old tape, old paper, no name. The sound from the front of the shop came a second later. Not the bell, because the bell still did not work, just the faint scrape of the front door opening. Lenora straightened too quickly and hit the corner of the desk with her hip. She shoved the envelope under a stack of invoices and stepped into the back room, just as a man's shadow crossed the floor. "Shop's closed," she called. The figure moved closer, and Lenora saw black coat, broad shoulders, the same stillness as the night before. Her anger arrived before relief had fully revealed itself, and that alone told her more than she wanted to know. "Do you make a habit of walking into private businesses after hours?" Sylvan stopped beside the work table and looked at her face first, then at the office behind her, then back at her face. "A man came here today." Lenora stared at him. "How do you know that?" He ignored the question. "Did he ask about Gavin?" The way he used her husband's name without explanation did something unpleasant to the room. Lenora crossed her arms. "You are going to tell me why you know what kind of men come asking for my dead husband, or you are going to leave." Sylvan was silent just long enough to make her understand he was deciding how much to give away. "Your husband moved something that did not belong to the men who trusted him." "That is not an answer. It's the beginning of one." Lenora laughed sharply. "I do not need beginnings, Mr. Marchetti. Strange men do not walk into my shop asking about black leather things unless there is already a middle." His eyes shifted, just slightly, toward the office door behind her. Not enough for anyone less tired than Lenora to catch, but she caught it. "What did you find?" Her hand twitched before she could stop it. Sylvan saw that too. Of course he did. He took one slow step closer, not threatening, not soft. "Lenora." The sound of her name in his mouth did not help. "You do not get to say it like that, and then ask me what I found in my own office. Then tell me why your hand is shaking." That did it. Anger, fear, the whole terrible day of holding herself together with florist's twine and denial, it all snapped at once. Because I am tired, she said. Because my husband has been dead 14 months, and I have spent all of them paying for the things he left unfinished. Because a man walked into my shop today and looked at the stairs where my mother sleeps and talked like he already knew I had something I did not even know existed. Because you sat through dinner last night with my fish, and my grief, and my bad acting, and all that time you knew Gavin's name and did not tell me why. So yes, my hand is shaking. Sylvan stood very still and let the anger land. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself too fast. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. Show me. Lenora should have thrown him out. She knew that. Instead, she turned, went into the office, and pulled the envelope from under the invoices. She did not hand it to him right away. She held it between them like evidence and accusation both. If this gets my family hurt, it already has that chance. His eyes moved from the envelope to hers. I'm trying to lower it. The truth in that made her furious. It also made her open the envelope. Inside was a photograph, a small brass key, and 3 folded sheets of paper covered in numbers and route codes in Gavin's handwriting. Lenora recognized his cramped capital letters at once. Recognition struck like nausea. Gavin had written grocery lists that way. Anniversary reminders. Car repair numbers. The ordinary things of a life. Seeing the same hand tied to something secret made the floor under her feel unreliable. Sylvan looked over the first page, then the second, then the photograph. The change in his face was tiny, but unmistakable. Varese, he said. Lenora's skin turned cold. That name means something to you. Yes, to me too, she said, before she could stop herself. She remembered Maureen once lowering her voice when she thought Lenora was upstairs, remembered Gavin brushing off a story about shipping contracts and saying some names were better left in newspapers. Back then, Lenora had wanted peace more than details. Now she hated every minute she had chosen not to know. Sylvan looked at the brass key. Storage. That's helpful. Thank God you're here. His eyes lifted to her. Lenora. No, don't. She stepped back from the desk. Do not say my name in that voice like it solves anything. Tell me exactly what my husband got tangled in. Before Sylvan could answer, Maureen's voice came from the doorway. I can tell you part of it. Lenora turned so fast, the chair leg scraped the floor. Maureen stood there in her blue robe with one hand braced against the frame, looking older than she had that morning, and angrier too. Not at Lenora, but at time. Cora was half a step behind her in leggings and a college sweatshirt, eyes moving from Lenora to Sylvan, to the papers on the desk, and understanding too much too fast. Mom? Cora said, what is this? Maureen came into the office and sat without being asked, as if her knees had made the choice for her. She looked at the photograph first, then closed her eyes. I knew he borrowed, she said. Lenora stared at her. You knew Gavin borrowed money? Maureen's chin trembled once. Your father got sick. The building needed work. The spring season failed that year. Gavin said it was temporary. He said it was from men who dealt in trucks. I asked no further because I wanted to believe the lie while it still sounded small. Maureen. Lenora only used her mother's first name when she was too angry to say Mom. You knew and never told me? I knew enough to be afraid and not enough to be useful, Maureen snapped back, and the sharpness in her voice stopped Lenora cold, because it had been years since her mother had any energy left for anger. There is a difference. And if you think I have not regretted every quiet minute since, then you are not the only one in this room who buried a man with unfinished words still in his pockets. The office went silent. Cora took one step nearer the desk. Who is Varese? Sylvan answered because Lenora could not yet trust herself to speak without breaking something. A man who owns more people than he owns buildings. Your father worked close enough to his world to get himself noticed. Cora looked at the photograph again, then at Lenora. Is this why the strange man came today? Yes, Lenora said. Did you call the police? Sylvan and Lenora spoke at the same time. No, Lenora said. It won't help, Sylvan said. Cora looked from one to the other. That is not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be, Lenora muttered. Sylvan picked up the key. If Gavin hid this, he meant for it to be found only after people started asking. That means whatever is in the locker matters enough to kill for. Maureen put a hand over her mouth. Cora went very still. Lenora looked at Sylvan. And you know that because? Because men like Varese don't test doors unless the thing they lost can damage them. The word doors landed hard because Lenora suddenly remembered the stranger's glance toward the stairs, the way he had measured the room, the way he had spoken as if time already belonged to him. Fear finally stopped pretending to be irritation. Sylvan must have seen the change in her face because his next words were simple and direct. You don't stay here tonight. Lenora's head snapped up. Absolutely not. He did not argue immediately, which somehow gave the statement more weight. They know the shop. They know the building. They know you didn't go to the police. That means they expect you to stay where your life already is. I won't. Cora folded her arms. That "I won't" sounded very mafia. Sylvan looked at her. It was. To Lenora's surprise, that made Cora breathe out a laugh. Not because anything was funny, but because honesty in the middle of fear sometimes sounded ridiculous enough to be useful. Maureen did not laugh. She was looking at Sylvan the way women of her age looked at storms, assessing not whether they could stop them, but whether they could survive with the windows still in place. You knew Gavin's name before dinner, Lenora said. How much did you know? Sylvan took longer with that answer than with any other. I knew there were whispers around your husband after he died. I knew he moved deliveries that had nothing to do with flowers. I knew Varice's men stopped asking questions too quickly after the funeral. His gaze stayed on Lenora's face. I did not know whether you were part of it or just standing beside it. Lenora felt the words like a slap. So dinner was an interview? No, don't insult me. It started as caution, he said. It did not stay there. The room held still on that sentence. Lenora hated the tiny flare that rose under her anger because she wanted it to mean less than it did. You came to watch me. Yes. And you still sent gardenias this morning. Yes. Cora looked between them with the exhausted interest of a 19-year-old who could tell an adult situation had become stranger than anyone wanted to admit. Maureen, however, had gone pale again. She pushed herself up from the chair. I don't care why he came to dinner, she said. I care about those men coming back to my stairwell. She looked at Lenora. He's right. We don't stay. There it was, the sentence that cut through pride more efficiently than any threat. Lenora turned toward her mother, then toward her daughter, then back to the papers on the desk. The whole shop smelled of wet leaves and cold roses and gardenias from the front. Home, work, debt, grief. She had protected that building through funerals and late rent and broken plumbing and one very stupid marriage. Leaving it overnight felt like surrender. Staying inside it now felt like stupidity, dressed as loyalty. When? She asked. Sylvan answered at once. Now. The next 20 minutes moved with the ugly speed of panic trying to look practical. Cora packed a backpack and complained while doing it, because complaining was how she fought fear. Maureen took 3 sweaters, her pills, the photo of Lenora's father that stayed by the stove, and not a single thing else, because apparently survival had taught her what mattered. Lenora locked the shop register, took the envelope, the photograph, the key, and Gavin's papers, then stood in the back room one last second with her hand on the cooler door, furious at herself for needing to leave with strangers guarding the street. Mateo appeared at the back entrance before she saw him enter, which told her something about the kind of men Sylvan kept near. Another man waited in the alley by the car, tall and quiet and unintroduced. Cora stared openly. Do all of you look like you came from a very expensive threat? Mateo's face did not change, only on weekdays. That made Cora laugh again, quick and nervous, and even Lenora felt the corner of her mouth turn before she could stop it. Sylvan, standing behind them with one hand on the office doorframe, watched the exchange without comment. She could feel his attention the way she had felt it all night before, steady, patient, impossible to ignore. The apartment he took them to was above one of his own closed restaurants in Brooklyn, though Lenora only learned that after they arrived. It was not luxurious in the loud way she expected from men with money. It was clean, secure, private, and clearly meant for use rather than display. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, thick curtains, locks that looked serious, and windows facing brick instead of skyline. A safe place, not a beautiful one. For some reason, that made her trust it a fraction more. Maureen sat down in the nearest chair as soon as they entered and said, I'm too tired to be impressed, which is probably good for everyone. Cora took the second bedroom because she was young enough to recover first from almost anything. Mateo stayed outside the apartment door. The other guard went downstairs, and then it was only Lenora and Sylvan in the small kitchen with the envelope spread between them, and midnight approaching too fast. Sylvan set the photograph flat on the table again and pointed to the half-seen man near the van. I know him. You know everyone. No, he looked at the image. Only the ones worth worrying about. Lenora leaned in despite herself. Who is he? Paolo Serra. He handled storage sites for Varice until 3 years ago. Sylvan tapped one line on the paper Gavin had written. If Gavin copied these numbers, he wanted a map to something bigger than a debt. Lenora stared at the codes and dates. Why keep paper if it was that dangerous? Because desperate men trust what they can touch. His eyes moved to hers. and because part of him probably planned to use it if he needed protection. From Verisi. Yes, the room went quiet again. It was happening too fast, Lenora thought. Too many truths at once. Her husband had lied. Her mother had known enough to worry. A stranger had come into the flower shop. The man from dinner had turned out to know much more than he said, and through all of it, the most irritating part remained the same. Sylvan was not behaving like a man who wanted applause for any of this. He looked tired, focused, dangerous, present. Not once had he tried to charm her into calm. He just kept telling the truth and waiting for her to decide what to do with it. "Why gardenias?" she asked suddenly. The question surprised both of them. Sylvan looked up from the papers. "What?" "You heard me." He held her gaze. "Because you talked about them like they mattered." "That is not an answer men like you usually give." "No," he said, "it isn't." Lenora looked away first. The heat from the kettle behind her had warmed the small kitchen, but she still felt chilled under the borrowed quiet. "I don't know what to do with you." "That makes two of us." She turned back to him at that, and he had just enough expression on his face to make the sentence feel honest rather than smooth. Before she could answer, the buzzer from downstairs sounded once, short and sharp. Mateo's voice came through the speaker a second later. "We have movement near the shop." Lenora's heart lurched so hard it nearly made her dizzy. Sylvan was already at the speaker. "How many?" "2 men outside front, 1 in the alley. No entry yet." Sylvan looked at Lenora over his shoulder. "You left on time." The sentence should not have brought relief. It did. Relief and fresh terror with it, because it meant the choice to leave had probably kept her mother and daughter from hearing strangers in the back stairwell by 1 thin hour. What do they want? Maureen's voice came weakly from the other room, because of course even half asleep she had heard enough. Sylvan pressed the button again. "Stay on them. No contact unless they try the door." He let go of the speaker, and the apartment went silent except for the hum of the fridge and Lenora's own breathing. She sat down because her knees had become unreliable. So they came. "Yes, for the papers? For whatever they think Gavin left." Sylvan remained standing, one hand on the back of a chair, the other near the table. "And now they know the shop is empty." Lenora closed her eyes. That image hurt more than it should have. The dark storefront. The bowl of gardenias by the register. Men outside measuring the windows while the place stood blind and empty behind the glass. Sylvan's voice came lower then. "Lenora." She opened her eyes. "We go to the locker in the morning." There was no false comfort in that sentence. No promise that all of this would shrink by sunrise. Only movement. Action. A next thing large enough to stand on. Lenora looked at the papers on the table, the brass key, the photograph of Gavin smiling beside a van that now looked like the edge of a cliff, and then at the man across from her who had entered the night as a blind date and ended it as the only person in the room who knew what kind of war had just come to her door. Outside, in the city she had always thought she understood well enough to survive, 3 men were standing near her flower shop in the dark, waiting for something her dead husband had hidden, inside the safe apartment above a closed restaurant, while Lenora Quinn wrapped both hands around a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink, and realized the worst part was no longer pretending to be someone else at dinner. The worst part was knowing she had no use for pretending now at all, because the danger had finally found her by name. Sylvan did not leave the kitchen after saying it. He stayed where he was, one hand resting near the papers Gavin had hidden, the other around a mug of tea he had not touched, as if he understood that once a woman realized danger had finally found her by name, silence could feel either cruel or useful, depending on who was standing inside it with her. Lenora sat across from him with both hands around her own cup, and listened to the old refrigerator hum and the rain ticking weakly against the glass. And for the first time since the stranger had stepped into her flower shop that afternoon, she stopped trying to arrange her face into something controlled. It was too late for that. Maureen came back into the kitchen wearing slippers and a cardigan over her robe, her gray hair loose from the bun she usually kept neat even at midnight. Cora followed her, sleepy and sharp at once, one hand dragging through her hair, the other still holding the notebook she had brought from the apartment as if schoolwork could keep the world from turning strange. No one looked ready for bed anymore. "Tell us exactly what happens in the morning," Maureen said to Sylvan, not like a woman asking for comfort, but like a woman who had lived too long to waste time on soft lies. Sylvan turned his attention to her without changing posture. "At first light, Mateo and I take Lenora to the storage locker. We go in, we see what Gavin left, and we leave before anyone else can get there. 2 men stay here with you and Cora. Another stays downstairs. No one opens the door unless it's me or Mateo." Cora folded her arms. You say that like people listen to you all the time. They usually do. That must be exhausting. For other people, yes. Despite herself, Lenora almost smiled. Cora caught it and looked mildly offended on principle. Maureen, however, was watching Sylvan in the same way she watched men who came into the shop pretending they wanted peonies, when what they really wanted was to impress their wives. Measuring what was real. Measuring what would rot by Friday. You knew Gavin was mixed up in something before tonight, Maureen said. Yes, and you still sat down to dinner with my daughter. Yes, that answer sat in the room without apology. Maureen nodded once, a small hard movement that seemed to accept honesty even where she did not like it. Then either you are a fool or you already planned to protect her. Sylvan did not look at Lenora when he answered. I never sit down without planning for trouble. That was not the question. The silence stretched long enough for Lenora to feel it in her throat. Sylvan looked at Maureen then, directly, and said, by the end of dinner, yes. Cora's eyes moved instantly to Lenora, because daughters were born knowing when a room held something their mothers would rather keep unnamed. Lenora looked away and reached for the teacup again, even though the tea had gone cold. Maureen, for once, let it go. She straightened a little in her chair and said, fine, then we follow the plan. But if anything happens to her tomorrow, Mr. Marchetti, you and I will have a very ugly conversation. Sylvan's mouth moved just enough to suggest he understood exactly what kind of woman Maureen Quinn had been, before life and bad knees made her sit down more often. Fair, he said. The rest of the night passed in pieces. Cora finally went to the bedroom after making Lenora promise not to do anything brave and stupid before morning, which was insulting only because it was an entirely fair request. Maureen disappeared after that, though not before standing in the doorway and saying quietly to Lenora, don't carry all of your anger where your fear needs room to breathe. Then she shut the bedroom door and left Lenora alone with Sylvan and the envelope on the table. He was reading the papers Gavin had hidden, not quickly, not like a man trying to impress anyone with how much he could understand in a glance. He read the way he did everything else Lenora had seen so far, as if he had trained himself never to waste movement. She watched him for a few seconds longer than she meant to. You'll go blind if you keep staring holes into things, she said. Then I'll aim better. Lenora let out a dry breath that was almost a laugh. The quiet between them shifted slightly after that. Not gone, not easy, but less brittle. You said my husband moved something that didn't belong to Verisa's people, she said. What kind of something? Sylvan folded one of the papers and placed it back on the table. Money first, then roots, then names. He tapped the page with one finger. These numbers are partial account marks. This code here is a storage company. The rest looks like shipment references. For what? If I knew already, I wouldn't be sitting in this kitchen at midnight waiting for dawn. He said it without sharpness, but Lenora still felt foolish for asking. She stood and took her mug to the sink, mostly to do something with her hands. You notice a lot, she said. So I assume you also noticed I hate not knowing what room I'm standing in. Yes, good. Then maybe stop giving me answers that feel like half a staircase. Sylvan leaned back slightly in his chair, watching her. Verise launders money through 3 industries I know of. Shipping, construction, nightlife. If Gavin carried records, then either he was useful enough to trust for a while, or disposable enough to use before they planned to cut him loose. Lenora turned from the sink. Those are both terrible options. Yes, and which one do you think he was? Sylvan's gaze moved to the photograph again, then to the brass key. I think he started as one and became the other. That answer hurt in a place Lenora had not prepared for. She turned the faucet on just to listen to something else. After a moment, Sylvan stood, crossed the kitchen, and shut it off with a steady hand before she wasted a gallon out of irritation. He was close enough then that she could smell clean soap on him under the rain and the faint edge of whatever cologne he wore, something dark and dry. Nothing sweet about it. Why gardenias? She asked before her mind caught up to her mouth. Sylvan looked down at her, clearly surprised by the change in direction. What? The flowers, why those? He took half a second to answer, which told her the truth had not been prepared. Because last night, when you stopped performing for a few minutes, that was the only flower you spoke about like it meant more than business. Lenora did not move. That was enough? Yes, men usually need longer reasons for grand gestures. It wasn't a grand gesture. No? Sylvan shook his head once. It was a precise one. She should have stepped back then. Instead, she stood where she was, close enough to notice the tiredness around his eyes that made him look less untouchable than he had at dinner. That almost sounded kind. It almost was. There it was again, that dangerous pull beneath the evening, the one she had tried to smother under black fabric and whiskey and bad manners. Only now there was no dress to hide inside and no cigarette to pretend with. Lenora opened her mouth, not knowing what she would say. and the buzzer downstairs sounded once through the apartment speaker, breaking the moment cleanly in half. Mateo's voice came through to confirm the men at the shop had moved on for now. Sylvan stepped away to answer him, and by the time he turned back, the kitchen had become only a kitchen again. Lenora slept badly on the sofa. At some point just before dawn, she woke to find a blanket over her that she did not remember pulling up herself. Sylvan was nowhere in the room. The papers were gone from the table. She sat up too quickly, a useless flash of panic moving through her, until she heard his low voice from the hall speaking into a phone. The panic irritated her almost more than it relieved her. When had she become the sort of woman who woke up angry because a dangerous man had stepped into another room without warning? He returned already dressed, dark coat on, hair still damp from a quick shower, the hidden life of him fully in place again. Whatever softer edges the kitchen had found after midnight were gone. Mateo followed him a second later and handed Lenora a paper cup of coffee without expression. "You're both very rude," she said, taking it anyway. "We let you sleep," Mateo said. "For 4 hours? By our standards," he replied, "that's luxury." Sylvan looked at her over the top of his phone. "Wear flat shoes." Lenora would have refused on principle if she had not already changed into jeans and boots before coming out of the bathroom. Cora noticed at once when she stepped from the bedroom. "That means you're scared," she said. "It means I have good ankles. It means you're scared and pretending to be practical." Lenora kissed the top of her head on the way past. "Both things can be true." Cora caught her sleeve before she could reach the door. The 19-year-old sarcasm was gone from her face now. "Bring yourself back before you bring answers," she said, echoing Maureen's words from the night before, so closely it made Lenora feel suddenly, violently tender toward both of them. "I will," she said, and hoped she was not lying. The storage company sat near the water in a row of concrete units, with an office that looked too tired to care what passed through it. Morning had broken cold and colorless. Trucks moved on the avenue beyond. The river looked like sheet metal under the sky. Mateo spoke to the clerk at the window, while Sylvan watched the lot, and Lenora stood with the brass key in one hand inside her coat pocket, feeling it cut a small shape into her palm. She had never realized until then how loud quiet places could feel when you were waiting for the world to become worse. The locker was on the second level at the far end of a narrow corridor lined with steel doors. Dust sat in the corners. The air smelled like old cardboard and rust. Sylvan walked slightly behind Lenora, but not so close that she felt managed. Mateo moved ahead once, looked at both exits, and then nodded for her to open it. The key turned on the second try. Inside were 2 boxes, a tarp-covered trunk, a stack of old florist supply catalogs, and a winter coat Lenora recognized instantly as Gavin's, the one he had told her had been lost 2 years ago. The sight of it hit harder than she expected. That was the thing about dead men. Sometimes the grief lived in letters and photographs and funeral music. Sometimes it lived in a stupid brown coat folded over a box in a storage locker no one should have known existed. Sylvan opened the first box. Receipts, old route sheets, tire service records. The second held tools, and a wrapped bundle of cash too small to be worth a war. The trunk was the only thing that mattered. Mateo forced the stiff latch with the handle of a screwdriver he seemed to produce from nowhere, and when the lid finally opened, Lenora saw it at once. A black leather ledger wrapped in plastic, and beneath it, a sealed envelope with her name written on the front in Gavin's handwriting. For one sharp second, Lenora could not breathe. Sylvan picked up the ledger, but did not open it right away. He looked first at her face, then at the envelope. "Take your time," he said. That almost made her laugh. Time, as if the world had not already proven it moved whenever it wanted, and dragged everyone else with it. She broke the seal. The letter inside was written on plain-lined paper, folded twice, the edges worn soft. Gavin had always pressed too hard with a pen, and the same force cut through the page now. "Lenora, if you're reading this, I ran out of better choices. I know that sounds like the kind of excuse you hate, and maybe that's because I learned your hate better than I learned your peace. I borrowed money when your father got sick, then borrowed more when the shop started slipping. And every time I told myself I would fix it before it touched you. Men like Varese are built around that kind of lie. They make it easy to believe one wrong favor stays small. It doesn't. I started driving things that weren't flowers, carrying numbers I didn't understand. And by the time I understood them, it was already too late. I took the ledger because I finally saw the whole shape of what he owned. Money. Judges, cops, shipping routes, names that should have made better men run. I meant to get it to Marchetti. He isn't clean, but he keeps lines, and in that world, lines are the only mercy that matters. If I died before I reached him, it wasn't an accident. If that's what they told you, it was because they needed time. I'm sorry for every quiet lie I called protection. I'm sorry for leaving this in your walls. I'm sorry you had to become strong in ways that should have belonged to me. Tell Cora I saw her scholarship essay and cried in the van like a fool, because I knew she was already building the life I kept failing to protect. Tell Maureen she was right about me more often than I could bear. And you? I loved you badly, but I loved you true. Lenora read the last line twice because the first time it blurred halfway through. Loved you badly, but loved you true. It was the sort of sentence only a man already half broken and fully guilty could leave behind, and still manage to wound with honesty. Sylvan said nothing while she folded the letter again. That helped more than comfort would have. She had no room in her body for comfort yet. He knew you, she said at last. Only by reputation, Sylvan replied. He trusted that reputation more than Varese. Yes. Lenora stared at the ledger still in his hands. Then open it. He unwrapped the plastic. The leather was old, marked at the corners, thick with use. Inside, the pages were lined and numbered. Names, amounts, dates, ports, companies, initials beside judges and inspectors and route supervisors. Lenora did not understand half of it, but she understood enough. It was not just money, it was ownership written in ink, the sort of book that made cities behave badly because too many men inside them were already bought. Then she saw Gavin's initials near the back of the ledger, 3 entries. The last one dated 6 days before the heart attack that had supposedly killed him in the delivery van. Beside it, in neat black writing, asset closed. Lenora went cold so fast her teeth almost clicked. No, she whispered. Sylvan read the line too. His face did not change much, but something hard entered the room with them. Varese records dead links that way. Lenora laughed once, small and breathless and ugly. Dead links. Sylvan closed the book before she had to keep looking at it. Lenora, no, she said. Don't soften this. Don't make it cleaner. They killed him and wrote it down like he was a broken crate. The corridor outside stayed silent. Somewhere below them, a truck reversed with a soft mechanical beep. The ordinary world kept moving while she stood there in a storage locker holding her dead husband's letter and learning the official way a criminal had recorded his death. Sylvan did not touch her. He stood beside the open trunk with the ledger under one arm and let the moment be ugly. That, more than anything else, kept her from falling apart. When Matteo stiffened near the corridor entrance, Lenora noticed at once. What is it? Sylvan asked. Movement below, Matteo said softly. 2 men just came in. Didn't go to the office. Sylvan's eyes sharpened. We're done. Lenora folded Gavin's letter and put it inside her coat. Sylvan gave the trunk one last look, then shut it, took the ledger, and moved them out of the locker with the controlled speed of a man who had crossed enough bad rooms to know panic only fed the wrong people. They made it to the stairwell before the first voice rose from below. Second level. The shout hit the metal walls and came back wrong. Matteo swore under his breath, pushed Lenora behind him, and drew his gun so smoothly it looked like the weapon had grown there. Lenora froze for one humiliating second, not because she had never imagined danger, but because imagination had always kept its sounds cleaner than reality. Move, Sylvan said. They did. The first shot cracked from below, and punched a hole in the stair rail where Lenora's hand had been an instant earlier. Matteo fired back once. Sylvan pulled Lenora sideways into the service corridor instead of down the stairs, and suddenly they were running between storage rows with metal doors flashing past, and the echo of footsteps chasing them. Her lungs burned, her boots hit the concrete too hard. She could hear Sylvan behind her and Matteo somewhere to her left, and knew, with a strange, useless clarity, that this was not the kind of thing a florist survived by instinct. The service exit burst open at the end of the row. Cold air slapped her face. Matteo shoved her toward the waiting car, and then turned back to cover the door. Sylvan got her inside with one hand at her waist, and the ledger pressed under his coat with the other. By the time Matteo slammed into the front seat, another shot hit the car door and rang through the frame like a struck bell. The engine roared, tires screamed, the storage lot fell away behind them. No one spoke for the first 3 blocks. Then Lenora said, "They were waiting." "Yes," Sylvan replied. "For the locker." "Yes," and that means they knew about the key. "Or about Gavin's habits," Matteo said from the front without looking back. Lenora stared at the side of his head. That was not comforting. I wasn't aiming for comfort. By the time they reached the apartment again, Lenora's whole body had begun to shake in delayed waves. Cora was at the door before Matteo could unlock it, Maureen behind her, and one look at Lenora's face was enough to wipe every last trace of youth from Cora's expression. "What happened?" she asked. Lenora went inside, took off her coat, and placed the folded letter on the kitchen table. "Your father lied more carefully than I knew," she said. They read the letter together. Cora started crying halfway through and got angry at herself for it. Maureen sat down and crossed herself, then sat there with both hands folded so tightly in her lap that the knuckles went white. When Lenora showed them the line in the ledger beside Gavin's initials, the room fell into the kind of silence that changed shape around grief. "I knew he borrowed," Maureen said at last. "I did not know he would try to turn back. He tried too late," Lenora replied, then hated herself immediately for the bitterness in her own voice. Maureen looked at her with something close to pain. "Late still matters." Lenora turned away. Across the room, Sylvan closed the ledger and set it down with more care than the book deserved. His face had gone harder since the attack. "We have a bigger problem now," he said. "Varese knows the ledger is in play." Cora wiped angrily at her cheeks. "Then use it." Sylvan looked at her. "That was always the plan." "What plan?" Lenora asked. He did not dodge. "To use the ledger to cut Varese's protection. To pressure names above him. To make his people less loyal than they are afraid. And if that fails, then I remove him another way." He said it so plainly that even Maureen, who had spent the entire morning fighting not to flinch every time she looked at him, stared. Lenora was beginning to understand that his quiet was never softness. It was structure, a place all the harder things sat inside. The next fight came from a direction she should have expected. Around noon, when the worst of the first shock had finally settled into a thinner, more practical fear, Cora took out the scholarship packet she had brought the night before and set it on the table. "I still have to go to campus," she said. Lenora blinked at her. "No." "Yes." "No." Cora looked at Sylvan as if inviting a witness, and found none. "I have an aid review I can't miss. If I miss it, they push the paperwork, and if they push the paperwork, next semester turns into a disaster. I am not losing school because Dad made bad decisions, and a psychopath writes things in leather books." "You're not going anywhere near campus," Lenora said. Cora's jaw set in the exact way Gavin's used to, when he thought he was being brave and reasonable at once. "You always told me not to let panic choose for me." "Panic is not choosing. Your mother is." That came from Sylvan. Lenora turned on him, ready for a fight, but he was watching Cora, not her. "She goes," he said, "with Mateo and another car. In and out. No stops. No one tells the office where she's staying. Papers signed. Back here." Lenora stared. "Are you both insane?" "No," Cora said. "We're practical." Lenora laughed once in disbelief. "I hate this entire kitchen." Sylvan said nothing more, which told her the decision had already been weighed on scales she had not seen. She wanted to argue longer, wanted to drag Cora into the bedroom and remind her she was still 19 and the world was allowed to wait. Instead, she looked at her daughter's face and saw the hard, trembling courage inside it. Fear had already taken enough from them. Letting it take school, too, would only teach the wrong lesson. 2 hours, Lenora said. Cora came around the table and threw her arms around her so fast Lenora almost lost balance. "I love you," she said into Lenora's shoulder. "That's very manipulative." Still true. Mateo left with Cora 40 minutes later. The apartment went wrong the moment the door shut behind them. Maureen retreated to the bedroom because waiting made her bones ache more. Lenora paced the kitchen until Sylvan finally said, "You're wearing a groove in the floor." She stopped and glared at him. "Say one more calm thing and I'll throw the kettle at you." He leaned against the counter with the ledger open in front of him, still somehow composed in the middle of a day that had already involved gunfire and dead husbands and missing peace. "I'm trying to keep you busy. That is not your job." "No," he said. "Keeping you alive is." The line shut her up in a way she hated. An hour later, her phone rang. Cora's name flashed on the screen. Relief hit so fast Lenora smiled before she answered. The smile died in the space between hello and the voice that answered. "Ms. Quinn." The room disappeared. "What did you do?" Lenora asked. The man on the line sounded almost cheerful. "Your daughter signed her papers. Good for her. Education is wasted on most people, but she seems determined." Lenora gripped the phone so hard her fingers hurt. "Let me hear her." A pause. Then Cora's voice, tight and trying not to shake. "Mom?" Lenora shut her eyes. "Are you hurt?" "No." The phone changed hands again. "Bring me the ledger," the man said. "Old loading warehouse on Pier 9. 1 hour. No police. Marchetti can come if he wants, but if I see more than one extra car, the girl loses something you'll both miss." The line went dead. Sylvan was already standing. "Pier 9? Lenora nodded because speech had become difficult. "Mateo?" he asked. She called back. Mateo answered on the second ring, breath hard, rage under every word. A van had cut across their path in the parking structure. One of Verace's men had posed as campus security to move people away from the section. Mateo had put one man down and lost Cora to another before the elevator doors closed. He had one cut to the head and enough self-hatred in his voice to fill the room. "Alive is enough," Sylvan told him. "Get to the pier." Lenora caught his sleeve before he could move away. "I'm coming." "Yes," she blinked. "That simple?" "No." His eyes locked on hers. "But if he wants the ledger, he wants you to prove it's real. He won't trade with proxies." Maureen appeared in the kitchen doorway, as if she had been standing there for longer than either of them knew. Her face had gone gray again. "Bring my granddaughter back," she said. Sylvan looked at her with a seriousness Lenora had seen him give almost no one. "I will." There was nothing theatrical in the promise. That was the frightening part. Pier 9 sat where the city got tired of pretending the water belonged to tourists. Rusted beams, old loading platforms, dark windows, and the smell of old oil under the river wind. Lenora knew the place by sight from deliveries years ago, back when Gavin still claimed the extra routes were worth the money. That realization landed in her like a stone. He had probably stood in that same building with fear in his stomach and guilt already inside him. Maybe he had thought of her then. Maybe he had thought only of escape. Dead men never clarified their timing. Sylvan drove the last block in silence. The ledger sat between them, wrapped in dark cloth. Mateo's car came in from the far side 2 minutes later. Blood marked the edge of his hairline. He had cleaned up enough to keep working, but not enough to look human again. "Visible men?" Sylvan asked. "4 outside, maybe more in the office upstairs," Mateo replied. "I saw Cora once through the dirty glass. She's tied to a chair." Lenora's vision narrowed. "I'm going in now." Sylvan caught her wrist before she reached for the door. "You go in when I do." "I am not waiting while he—" "You are," Sylvan said, and it was the first time his voice sharpened enough to sound like the man other people must have known before dinner. "You lose control for 1 second in there and he reads it. He reads it. He owns the room. He owns the room. Your daughter pays. So you breathe. You walk. You let me speak until you need to." Lenora stared at him, angry and terrified, and so close to obeying without argument that it scared her. If he touches her, he won't keep the hand. That was not a metaphor. The certainty in it settled her more than kindness would have. They entered through the side loading door. The warehouse was wider than it looked from outside, full of shadows and old metal and the smell of damp wood. Verice waited near the center under a hanging work light, one hand in his coat pocket, the other gloved and relaxed at his side. He looked like the sort of man who still sent holiday cards to judges. Above them, through the dirty office window, Lenora could just make out Cora's shape bound to a chair. Verice smiled when he saw her. Clean smile. Gavin had been right about that. "Mrs. Quinn," he said. "You brought him. I was hoping you would." Sylvan walked beside Lenora with the wrapped ledger in one hand. "You have the girl. You have my property." Lenora heard her own voice before she felt the decision to speak. "You wrote my husband down like a broken crate." Verice's smile did not move. "Your husband made a useful mistake and then an inconvenient one. You killed him. I finished what he started." Verice tilted his head slightly. "You should blame the part of him that thought fear made him interesting." Sylvan stepped half a fraction closer to Lenora, enough to block her from rushing forward without making it obvious. "You have the book," he said. "Bring the girl down." "Yeah." Verice looked at him. "And you'll hand it over? Just like that? After all the trouble you went through to find it?" Sylvan did not blink. "If she walks out alive?" Lenora turned to him so sharply her shoulder brushed his arm. She could not help it. The ledger was the reason any of this mattered to him at all. The reason he had come to dinner. The reason he had chased Gavin's shadows. The reason half the city probably behaved around his name. And he was prepared to hand it over for Cora, without bargaining once it mattered. Verice noticed the look on her face and smiled wider. "Ah," he said softly. "That part you didn't know." "Bring her down," Sylvan repeated. Verice lifted 2 fingers. A man appeared at the upstairs door and dragged Cora into view by the arm. She was pale, furious, and alive. Lenora stopped breathing. "Ledger first," Verice said. "No," Sylvan replied. "She walks down the stairs, halfway. Then you get the book." Verice pretended to think about it, but Lenora saw the answer in his face before he spoke. He believed he had already won. Fine. Cora started down the stairs with the guard behind her. Her chin was up. Her eyes found Lenora immediately, then Sylvan, then the ledger. She understood enough not to speak. Halfway down, Verice extended his hand. Sylvan unwrapped the ledger. The black leather caught the hanging light. For one terrible second, the whole warehouse held still around it, every breath tied to the book. Then Sylvan tossed it, not to Verice, into the open furnace pit at the side of the old loading floor, where the building's ancient heating system still burned low orange through a cracked grate. Varese shouted. The ledger hit the metal edge, slid, and vanished into flame. The shock on Varese's face lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Enough for Mateo's shot to hit the guard on the stairs. Enough for Cora to throw herself down the last few steps. Enough for Sylvan to shove Lenora toward her daughter and draw his gun at the same time. Chaos opened all at once. Lenora caught Cora against her and dragged her behind a stack of old crates while gunfire broke the air apart. Mateo moved on Varese's left. One of Sylvan's men came in through the far door. Varese pulled his own gun too late, fury ruining the clean lines of his face at last. "What did you do?" he shouted. Sylvan's voice came back cold and level through the noise. "I copied it." The answer hit Varese harder than the fire had. He swung toward the side exit instead of toward the fight, and Lenora understood at once. He wanted out, wanted space, wanted survival more than victory now that the leverage was gone. A shot cracked. Sylvan jerked once at the shoulder but stayed upright. Lenora screamed his name before she could stop herself. Varese heard it, smiled like filth, and fired again toward the crates. The bullet never reached them. Mateo took him down through the leg, and Varese crashed against the old rail with a curse that sounded more shocked than pained. Everything should have ended there. It didn't. Varese, bleeding and half kneeling, looked up at Lenora with that same terrible, clean smile and said, "Your husband begged less than I expected." The sentence erased the last thread of fear inside her and replaced it with something colder. She stood before Sylvan or Mateo could stop her, grabbed the heavy steel flower hook lying by the crate pile, and crossed the distance in 3 strides, fueled entirely by old grief and the fresh knowledge of what bad men did with names and records and fathers. She swung hard. The hook caught Varese's gun wrist and sent the weapon skidding across the concrete. He cried out, more in rage than pain. Lenora raised the hook again, but this time Sylvan was there, his good hand closing around her forearm before the second blow could fall. "Enough," he said. Not because Varese did not deserve it. Lenora heard that clearly in his voice. Because Cora was crying behind her. Because Maureen was waiting. Because once you crossed certain lines, the rest of your life learned to speak with them. Varese tried to reach for the fallen gun with his other hand. Sylvan shot him once in the chest. The clean smile vanished. So did everything else. Silence dropped over the warehouse in hard, ragged pieces. Mateo kicked the weapon away and looked down at Varese without expression. Cora staggered into Lenora's arms. This time, Lenora held her with both hands and shook with her, too full of relief to care who saw. "I'm okay," Cora kept saying. "I'm okay, I'm okay." Lenora kissed her hair, her forehead, her wet cheek. "You're not allowed to say I told you so for at least a week." Cora laughed and cried at the same time. 2 weeks. Sylvan made a sound then, small and wrong. Lenora turned. Blood was spreading dark across the side of his coat. He had been hit more seriously than she understood in the noise. Mateo was already at his arm, pressing hard, his face stripped clean of everything except focus. "Car," he snapped at one of the men. "Now." Lenora moved before thought caught up. "Sylvan." He looked at her, pale now under the warehouse light, but still standing because apparently stubbornness had bones. "You got the girl," he said, as if that settled something. "You burned the ledger. Copies matter more." "That's not what I mean." His eyes found hers fully then, and whatever else existed in the warehouse disappeared around that look. "I know," he said. The drive to the clinic became a blur of blood and speed, and Mateo swearing under his breath in a language Lenora did not know. Cora stayed pressed against her in the back seat, shaking only when she thought no one noticed. Sylvan sat braced in the front while Mateo drove, one hand locked over the wound, his jaw hard enough to crack stone. He did not lose consciousness. That terrified Lenora more than if he had. Men who stayed awake through that kind of pain had already taught themselves long ago that asking for help changed nothing. She hated that she knew it. She hated more that she cared. The clinic was private, fast, and clearly familiar with bullet wounds that would never enter public records. A doctor met them at the door. 2 nurses moved Sylvan away before Lenora could even touch him again. Mateo stayed close enough to be thrown out and not far enough to be useless. Cora sank into a chair in the waiting room with a blanket around her shoulders, and Maureen's cardigan over that, because Maureen had arrived in another car 5 minutes after the call, and started mothering all available air out of fear. No one said much for the first half hour. Relief was too fragile to trust. Finally, Maureen sat beside Cora, took her face in both hands, and kissed her forehead. "You gave me 10 years in one afternoon," she said. "Sorry," Cora whispered. "No, you're not." "Not really." That made Maureen laugh once through tears, and the sound saved the room a little. When the doctor finally came out, he looked too calm for Lenora's heart to accept. "The bullet went through the muscle and missed the lung by more luck than he deserves," he he said. He'll keep the shoulder if he behaves badly and heals worse than I tell him to. Lenora closed her eyes. Cora let out a breath that turned into a sob halfway through. Matteo sat back against the wall and looked, for one brief, unguarded second, younger than he had at the warehouse. An hour later, Lenora stood outside Sylvan's room, staring at the door, like it might tell her what version of him would be on the other side. Dangerous, yes, still dangerous, but also the man who had thrown the ledger into fire, rather than let her daughter remain in Verice's hands 1 second long. The man who had come to dinner planning to study her, and somehow ended the week bleeding in her war as if it had always been his too. When she walked in, he was awake. His arm was bandaged and strapped. He looked tired for the first time since she had met him, and because of that, he also looked more human than power usually allowed. He turned his head when she entered and said, "You're frowning at me like I did something stupid." "You did. It worked. That doesn't make it intelligent." Sylvan watched her come closer. "You don't sound grateful." Lenora stopped beside the bed. "I am not grateful for men getting shot in front of me. I am furious, which is unfortunately very close to gratitude." The corner of his mouth moved, then stopped because apparently smiling hurt. "That sounds difficult." "It is." He looked at her for a long second, then said quietly, "I was always going to choose her." Lenora understood at once what he meant. The ledger, the fire, Cora, the choice that had changed the whole shape of the warehouse. "I know," she said. "No," he said, "you saw it, that's different." The truth of that hit her with such force that she had to sit down. She took the chair beside the bed and stared at his hand resting on the sheet, then finally laid her own over it. His fingers turned and closed around hers at once despite the fatigue. The movement was small, but not uncertain. "You set me up," she said softly. "Yes." "You knew Gavin's name?" "Yes." "You sent flowers to a woman you were investigating?" "Yes." "You are very difficult to forgive." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you want the honest answer or the safe one?" Lenora looked at him. "Honest." "I don't want forgiveness if it makes you smaller." That did it. That was the sentence that pushed her past all the careful thoughts she had been using as a railing. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a polished kiss, not the kind either of them would have given in a better room on an easier night. It was tired and fierce and full of too many truths arriving at once. Sylvan did not move much because he clearly would have torn the doctor's stitches out of pure male stupidity if he tried. But his good hand came up to her face with a gentleness that made something inside her go painfully soft. When she drew back, he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not surprise, not triumph. Something quieter, something far more dangerous. "You should have done that before I burned a very valuable book," he said. Lenora laughed through tears she had given up pretending not to have. "You don't get to flirt after surgery." "I wasn't flirting." No. His thumb rested near the corner of her mouth. "I was complaining." The days that followed moved more slowly than fear and blood had allowed. Verice's death did not fix the city, but it cut one poisonous thread. Sylvan's copies of the ledger pages went to exactly the people he wanted them to reach, and the damage began in places Lenora could not see but could feel, in the way Matteo answered calls with less tension, and the way one old supplier suddenly decided to forgive 3 months of delayed payments after a quiet meeting he refused to discuss. Men vanished from offices. One inspector retired before lunch. A councilman pretended he had always planned to spend more time with family. The city cleaned its face the way guilty men always did, too quickly and with no eye contact. Sylvan recovered badly, exactly as predicted. He left the clinic too soon. He came by the shop too early. He tried lifting a flower bucket one-handed and earned a lecture from Maureen so sharp that even Matteo turned away to hide what might have been laughter. Cora resumed classes with a driver for 2 weeks and spent half that time insulting the arrangement, and the other half giving Matteo detailed instructions about coffee that he pretended not to remember, and always got right. Quinn House Florals reopened fully the Monday after the shooting. Lenora stood at the front counter with fresh gardenias in a low bowl, and watched people come in for ordinary reasons again. Birthdays, thank you gifts, a hotel luncheon, one engagement party. She had never understood until then how beautiful ordinary reasons could feel after danger made a map through your life. Sylvan did not try to take over anything. That mattered. He did not pay off every debt in one heroic sweep, or buy the building, or tell her to stop working because he could handle it now. Instead, he did the thing far harder for a man like him. He treated her work as real work. One of his restaurants needed weekly arrangements. Then another. He asked her to bid on them like any other vendor, and only when she gave him a number too small to be honest, did he slide the paper back and say, "You charge like a woman afraid of needing anything." Lenora stared at him across the counter. That was rude. It was accurate. Cora, who was trimming stems nearby, said without looking up, "He's right. I hate both of you. You love me," Cora said. Sylvan said nothing at all, which only made Lenora more aware of him. Maureen changed more quietly. One evening, a week after the warehouse, she found Lenora in the back room redoing a bridal sample she had already finished twice and said, "He looks at you like a man who has already decided what kind of damage he's willing to take." Lenora nearly dropped the ribbon scissors. Maureen continued arranging white roses as if discussing weather. "That can be good or bad. The useful question is whether you believe he knows the difference. What if I don't know yet?" Maureen snipped a stem. "Then don't decide too fast, but don't lie to yourself slowly either. That wastes years." It was, Lenora reflected later, an extremely motherly thing to say after helping survive a kidnapping. 3 weeks after the blind date, Sylvan asked her to dinner again. This time he did it properly, in person, in the flower shop, while she was up to her elbows in peonies and late invoices. "Are you going to investigate me less this time?" she asked. "No, that is not the right answer. It is the honest one." Lenora looked at him over a bucket of white tulips. "Then maybe I'm free Thursday." "Good," he said, as if the matter had been settled hours before. On Thursday she wore a navy dress she actually liked, and lipstick she chose because it looked like herself. No leather jacket, no cigarettes, no whiskey on purpose. When she reached the rooftop restaurant, she found him waiting at the same table by the glass. Only this time there was no tension in her shoulders from deciding how to ruin the evening before it could judge her. Sylvan stood when she approached. "You're on time. Don't make a thing of it." "I was only noticing." "You noticed too much." "So you've said." Lenora sat down, looked at the candle between them, the skyline beyond, the same white tablecloth that had seen her try to become someone else, and felt something settle in her that had not been there the first time. Not safety exactly. Safety was too simple a word for what he had become. He was still dangerous, still part of a world she would never walk through casually, but danger and harm were not the same thing. She had learned that at great cost. So had he. A waiter came. Lenora ordered wine this time. Sylvan's gaze dropped once to the empty place on the table where a cigarette pack had sat before, then lifted back to her face. "What?" she asked. "I liked you in the black dress," he said. Lenora laughed. "I hated that dress." "No, you hated why you wore it." She tilted her head. "That sounded thoughtful. Are you feeling well?" "Not particularly." "That's reassuring." Dinner moved more easily than the first one had. Not smooth. Never that. Because whatever else Sylvan Marchetti was, he was not a smooth man. He was too honest at the wrong moments, and too quiet at the ones that usually invited performance. But the quiet no longer felt like a wall. It felt like space. Lenora told him Maureen had decided he was acceptable, but not yet forgiven for arriving in her life with armed men. Sylvan told her Mateo now took Cora's coffee orders more seriously than the clinic's discharge instructions. Lenora nearly choked on her wine laughing at that, which only encouraged him in the most unfair way. Later, while dessert sat half-touched between them and the city glowed below like something pretending innocence from a distance, Sylvan said, "You were right that first night." Lenora looked up. "About what? You said men like me want obedience dressed as softness." And I've seen a lot of it." He held her eyes. "That doesn't mean I ever wanted it from you." The sentence sat between them and altered the shape of the evening. Lenora put down her fork. "What did you want from me?" He did not answer quickly. That, more than anything else, told her the truth mattered. "At first," he asked, "I wanted to know whether you had the ledger." "And after?" His gaze did not move. "After, I wanted the woman who kept showing through the performance." Lenora looked down for a second, not out of shyness, but because sometimes the body needed a smaller place to stand inside strong truth. When she looked back up, she said, "That woman doesn't pretend very well." "No," Sylvan said, "she doesn't." He walked her back to the shop afterward, not because she needed escorting, not because the city remained too dangerous without him, though in some corners perhaps it did. He walked her back because leaving a good evening too quickly can feel like insulting it. At the shop door, under the old sign Gavin had once promised to repaint, Lenora turned to him and said, "I'm not the kind of woman men bring home." It was the same line she had thrown like a weapon on the blind date. This time it sounded different, more like a question she had grown tired of carrying. Sylvan stepped closer. "No," he said quietly. "You're the kind a serious man builds around." The words should have sounded possessive. Coming from someone else, maybe they would have. From him, they sounded like recognition of her mother upstairs, of Cora and her impossible coffee orders, of the flower shop and the debt and the grief and the sharp edges she no longer had to hide behind fake smoke and borrowed darkness. Lenora reached up, touched the lapel of his coat once, and said, "That's a dangerous thing to tell a woman on her own doorstep." His eyes darkened in a way she was learning to read. I know. She kissed him before she could think better of it. The shop smelled like lilies when she went inside. Maureen was asleep upstairs. Cora had left her notes spread over the kitchen table again, like evidence of youth and bad time management. Outside, the city kept moving through all its old habits, some broken, some not. Inside, Lenora stood for one quiet second with her hand on the lock and let herself feel what had changed. Not that a powerful man had saved her. That was never the whole truth. She had run, chosen, fought, stayed, and carried her family through every hard room beside him. What had changed was simpler and harder to admit. She no longer needed to become someone rougher, louder, more careless just to keep the wrong men away. She had met a man dangerous enough to recognize the difference between performance and truth, and disciplined enough to love the truth without trying to tame it. The bad girl from the blind date had done her job. She had gotten Lenora through one door, but she was no longer needed now. In her place remained the woman who sold flowers, buried lies, argued beautifully, loved her family fiercely, and had finally found a man who understood that none of those things made her easier. They made her worth choosing the hard way. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like more than survival. It felt like a future.